Welcome to episode 10 of The Journey of Sunday. I'm Andrew Carruthers, of course, from The Journeyist. And I want to first start out by wishing all my Christian friends out there a very happy Easter, and of course all my good Jewish friends out there a happy Passover. It's incredible what can shift in the course of a week. Last week I shared some perceptions with you that were kind of coming up to me around the words love and compassion, and especially how they play into our spirituality. After a week of diving into some pretty deep research, I have to say that perception has completely and totally shifted and is actually still evolving as I share this with you. So I thought what would be awesome this week is just to share some of that research with you guys and really just kind of turn it loose to you to get your perspective on everything that I'm finding out. Shortly after last week's episode, a good friend of mine reached out with kind of an explanation of what the Bible tells us about the term love. It was super interesting to me because one of the distinctions that I did kind of talk about last week was this kind of concept of, is there different kinds of love? Is there something that's more spiritual and something that's more human to human? And I love the way that this is mapped out in the Bible. The term that comes up is agape. And agape is the sense of love that is shared between the children of God and God. And that particular kind of love is very selfless, is very unconditional, and it's very, very pure. And isn't it a bit auspicious that today we're having this conversation because for Christians, really the greatest display of God's agape, or pure love, is that sacrifice that he made of his only son for the salvation of humanity. And over again in the Bible, it's very, very frequent to hear that we should have that kind of love for each other. And this was what was kind of tripping me up. And I kind of made this distinction last week that sometimes I feel like maybe I can't have true love for everyone because I don't get along with everyone. I felt that I could have compassion and understanding for everyone. But as I read more about this principle of agape, really all of those things are contained in that love, this selflessness, this unconditional quality to it. And then what kind of linked everything together was this perception of philia. And philia is more that brotherly love or just kind of that affection. And it can even be towards things that we enjoy. And so I thought about this, and even, the first two commandments in the Bible, the most significant commandments, first is to love God, but then it's to love thy neighbor. And I thought about that, and I'm like, okay, it's saying love thy neighbor, and if you look at the definition of love from a Christian point of view, it doesn't necessarily mean that I have to agree with that person, or that I even have to really enjoy their presence to give them pure love. And that term, philia, that's what kind of triggered that, because I realized that philia is that kind of just affection that we feel, or that connection that we could feel towards other human beings. And we don't necessarily have to have that for everyone. But the commandment is to love thy neighbor, which in an interesting way is almost easier to accept than to maybe personally agree with or to personally get along with my neighbor. And the Buddha taught a very similar kind of definition to true love. And it was interesting, I found this video with Thich Nhat Hanh and some writing from Thich Nhat Hanh that he was explaining how the Buddha saw true love. The four elements of that true love is really the same principles of the Brahma Viharas, which the first one is Maitri. Maitri is kindness and benevolence. The second one is karuna. Karuna is interesting because it is compassion, but it's compassion with a specific purpose, and that's to relieve the suffering of everyone around you. Mudita is the third one, and that is basically this sense of sympathetic joy. So why sympathetic joy? Because it has to be in sympathy with everyone around you. So it can't just be joy for me, it has to be sympathetic, which is to have joy for everyone and to also support joy in everyone. And the fourth one is upeksha. And upeksha is basically equanimity. This one was a little harder to really dig into an easy definition, but equanimity in the way that basically we are all deserving of that release from suffering. And the distinction that Thich Nhat Hanh was kind of specifically making was that this is different from what we tend to call love, which is kind of a romantic love. And he said that romantic love can be true love if it contains those four things, which might be something to check in for ourselves. Does my romantic relationship contain those four things? And this is where the Hindus and the Buddhists kind of take slightly different paths, because up until this point, that kind of definition of true love is basically the same. And that connection to God or the greater spirit or the universe or whatever you want to call it, kind of a similar principle. Where it starts to go in different directions is kama. Kama is often explained just as kind of the enjoyment of life, but it definitely is related to passion and sensuality and, this kind of thing that we think of as romantic love. And for the Hindus, kama, and there's actually a god Kama, is actually one of the four goals of human life, is to have this sense of passion and sensuality and enjoyment for life. The stark difference for the Buddhists is that kama is actually a source of suffering. And man, we could go down such a deep rabbit hole with this, because I can totally kind of understand both pieces of this, but we'll maybe save that for another video. But I think it's interesting that two belief systems that pretty much came from the same place could have a very, very different path when it comes to something like romantic love. These common themes kept showing up so often in the different pieces of research. The Jewish people, they have the Torah. And in the Torah, the central commandment of the Torah is to love thy neighbor. For the Sikhs, one of the 5 essential paths is to love. The Muslims, the Bahai, the Native Americans, the, Greek mythology, it just goes on and on and on. And it all keeps coming back to something very similar. And that similar quality, that similar path, all comes back to the principles of kindness, equanimity, compassion, and selflessness was something that came up in almost every single thing. And so on this beautiful spring Sunday, I'm very curious. After hearing these things, what are your thoughts? What might have even shifted a bit for you? Because I know for me, by exploring this, I am definitely developing a completely different perception of the word love and how that interacts with my spirituality, how that interacts with the community around me, and in the world in general. And please know that part of this exploration and part of what will continue to lead me to more understanding about this is definitely your comments and your thoughts. So I very much appreciate those. And just know today, regardless of your religious beliefs, regardless of your political beliefs, regardless if we see eye to eye, I am sending you all very deep, heartfelt, true love. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed episode 10 of The Journey of Sunday. We'll see you next week.